taking a 15-year-old system and we're taking all the hardware out of it, and we're going to refresh it into a sleeper build to make anybody who walks into your household, your bedroom, your gaming room, see this computer and they go, well, he's not going to be able to game on that until they turn it on, and then you blow their mind. Now, we're not going extreme hardware here. What we're doing is we're going to stick with an i5 3570. That is a 4-core, 4-thread processor. I'm looking for a 3770 or a 3770K or a 3570K, so we can do a little bit of overclocking with it. Stay tuned if we come across that hardware for an updated video content. However, today we are taking the Athlon 3800 Plus, 4 DDR2 DIMMs of 256 megabytes apiece, giving you a total of 1 gigabyte of RAM. This was good enough when you was running Windows Vista, Windows XP. When you start with Windows 7, Windows 8, and Windows 10, there's just not enough memory there to be able to run those OSs. They require at least 4 gigabytes of RAM. So, you're not going to be gaming on a single core processor that tops out at 1.8 gigahertz. Might get lucky to get 2.2 out of it. This is irrelevant in today's times. So we'll take this 1 gig of RAM, this 1 core processor, and this old school layout motherboard with just PCI and AGP. There is no PCIe when this board was released. So let's get the old hardware out of the way and get the new hardware in. The old hard drive was 106. This was a whopping large hard drive when this computer was new. Today, you'd be lucky to put 1 game on it. GTA 5, you're looking at 90 gigabytes right there. This is a 160 gig hard drive. You put GTA 5 on this and an OS, you're out of storage. So what we're going to be doing is taking this hard drive, which, yes, this is a 500 gig optical hard drive. Spinning, so if you was to put an OS on that, you would hinder your boot times drastically. But to keep your booting and your application launching and your web browsing quick and snappy, we're going to be using a Kingston 250 gig M.2 SATA SSD. Yes, this doesn't look like an M.2. That's because the Kingston M.2 is inside this Sabrent enclosure, which automatically converts it to a SATA port. So this is going to be our boot drive, and this is going to be a temporary Seagate game drive until I can get a 2 terabyte in, with shipping and the human malware going around right now being very difficult to get some higher end drives. So stay tuned for the updated link. We're going to use this as the game drive, use this as the boot drive. We've got the i5 here. This is the 3570. We're running 10 gigs of DDR3 RAM here, and it's running at 2666. So we're not going to be doing no memory overclocking. We're not going to be doing no CPU overclocking. This is basically going to run at stock speeds, but it's going to be exponentially higher than what we were upgrading from. So let's stop talking about the hardware and get this thing put together. Now, can't very well just jerk the side off, take one motherboard out, throw another motherboard in, because the old power supply had a 20-pin motherboard connector when the new boards are 24-pin. So what we're doing is we're using this power supply. It's not a very big upgrade, but going from a 300 watt power supply that only has a 20-pin connector, Molex, and the old disklet drive power ports, we need something with SATA and a little more wattage. This is a 450 watt Apriva. Yeah, Apriva Venus power supply, 450 watt. We're going to be using this temporarily until Dark Flash can ever get us our 850 sent to us. We're still waiting on that. Like I said, human malware shutting everybody down nationwide. So let's stop talking and get into building. Get that out of the way.
Find a case new CPU, especially this generation, because Intel has invested so much into the overclocking support, and the motherboard manufacturers have too, and you lose all of that with a non-case CPU. So we're going to be revisiting this. We had a couple questions asking, well, what if you tune?
To be able to set our new motherboard in, we had to cut a notch here. As you can see, the motherboard just barely hangs over past this cage, so we had to notch this a little bit. We're going to file this down to make it smooth and make it look like it's supposed to be there. But that's the only modifications we had to do to this case in order to make the new i5 fit. I did take out the card reader and put a USB 3.1 in. This is the original specs. It's an Athlon 64 3800 plus, 1GB of DDR2, 160 GB SATA hard disk with a DVD RW. Came with Windows Vista Basic. This is an Acer machine, but when we are done with it, it's going to be an i5 sleeper. We're going to start by putting the power supply in. You don't want a power supply that is a lower wattage rating than the components that are going to be in your computer. I've got another upcoming video about rent to own, errands, rent-a-center, renting to own electronics. Okay, that's fine. That helps people on a budget be able to get this higher end equipment that they wouldn't normally be able to afford. Except that $20 a week don't sound like much. And it's not. And then $80 a month still don't sound like much. But it's the extra payments. We had a client go to a rent-a-center and get a gaming PC that they said was top of the line. They have so far paid $2,200 on this computer. It didn't have an SSD. It had a GT 1030 graphics card in it. It had the base Ryzen 5 1400 4-core processor in it. It had one DIMM of 8GB RAM, DDR4 of course, and a B350 motherboard. But that was supposed to be high-end equipment. Now, I've upgraded the computer. I've thrown in an M.2 NVMe boot drive, 256 gig. I've thrown in a 2TB Seagate Barracuda hard drive for games. I've thrown in 8GB dual channel Patriot 3000 MHz RAM. I've got a Ryzen 5 1600 AF, which is the equivalent of the 2600 6-core 12-thread processor in order, waiting for it to arrive. And I've stuck a GTX 1060 graphics card in it. So the only reason this computer is a gaming PC is because of the hardware that I've put into it. So why are they charging $2,000? And I'm specifying they still owe $800 on this PC. $2,800 for a bottom-end gaming PC. This is a Ryzen 7 2700X 8-core 16-thread processor RGB Max Crucial Ballistics DDR4 memory running at 3200 megahertz, overclocked to 3400 megahertz, 32 gigabytes total, 8 terabyte hard drive, 2 NVMe 256 gigabyte Samsung NVMe boot disks in a RAID 0, and an RX 580 gigabyte graphics card, a Gigabyte Pro Wi-Fi B450 motherboard, and that is 10 times the computer of the one that they're paying $2,800 for. Nowhere close to costing that much if you build it yourself. That's why I make these videos. That's why I make this content. Don't get ripped off by these box stores. Do it yourself. Follow our videos. Follow Linus Tech Tips, Jay's 2 Cents, Bitwit. There's several YouTubers out there that will tell you step by step how to build your computer. Don't just go off of one video. Go off of all of them. Learn as much as you can. Build your own. Don't pay these outrageous prices for bottom-end equipment. And to beat all, after I've upgraded all these components in that computer, that's an HP Omen that they bought. It's got a 300 watt power supply in it. How was they even supposed to upgrade that? 300 watts, they throw too big of a graphics card in it, start throwing hard drives in there, they've overloaded it. This computer was not meant to be upgraded. Aaron's, Rent-A-Center, Rent-To-Own are just in it for the dollar. They are not there to help you. They're there to help themselves. So help yourself by learning as much as you can. I'll stop my rant. I really get irritated when people get ripped off. Let's get this together. There are 4 screws that hold your power supply to the case. Most of the newer cases, they were smart enough to put the power supplies in the bottom so the power supply fan can draw in cool air from the bottom and exhaust the hot air at the top. Well, the older cases, power supplies went in the top. That way they cooled themselves with that hot air coming off of your CPU and graphics card. So glad they did away with that. Now, you'll still find lower end cases out there with the hard drive or the power supply up top. But with the cooling additives that you can do anymore and the mods that you can do to your cases, you can put some good gear in these cases and cool. Even the hottest can run stable at 60 degrees Celsius. You must specify Celsius. Now, the cooler we're using here is an aftermarket RGB cooler. It's kind of the same equivalent of an Intel stock cooler. It's not as dense on the fins, but it does the job, and the CPU does not go over 60 degrees, even under 100% load in Cinebench R15 or R20. So, the way it was set up, the connector was a proprietary connector that we didn't have. This is a Dell motherboard, and we all know how Dell is. They don't want you to use anything else but their equipment, just like the intrusion detection and all the switches that they put in. Anyway, we had to hardwire this cooler into a Molex adapter to be able to plug it in. Well, while we did that, we didn't have any RGB in the system, so we took one green RGB strip, and we'll be adding that to the case. We're going to slip this down in here. Okay, make sure that your standoffs are lined up with the screw holes. You do not want an extra standoff there touching the back of the motherboard that's not being used. That can cause a short. And make sure you use all your screws to hold your motherboard in, because your motherboard might just be supporting its own weight against the case, but it's also got the CPU cooler attached to it. It's also got your graphics card attached to it, all of your RAM, and some of those heat sinks on your RAM can be even pretty hefty and get heavy. You don't want to put strain on your motherboard. Make sure you use every standoff and every screw that you can, and make sure it's securely mounted down. Don't drop a screw and let it go behind the motherboard. If you do that, and you say, oh, well, I'll just get it later, and you forget about that screw, it could very well lead to a short. That is not what you're wanting when you go to boot your computer for the first time. Now, I really should have routed my power cables before mounting the motherboard in place, but either way, with the power supply being up top and drive cages being in the front and how big the motherboard and how it flatly, there's no room behind the motherboard to be able to run any cables. We're going to go ahead and mount it, and we're going to run those cables through the front behind the drive cages to try and hide them. Don't over tighten your screws. You do not want to bend these boards. They are multiple layers on these PCBs, and if you were to bend them, you can break many layers of traces. Might not even realize it, and then all of a sudden you've got a dead DIMM slot, or you've got a dead PCI slot, or not even function at all. I'm missing a screw hole. No, I'm not. It's right here. Alright, we got the motherboard in. We need to get this out of our way. That goes to the CPU cooler. We need our 20-pin connector, which is now on the bottom. Stand this up here. Which is now on the bottom. To be able to route this big hunk of cables all the way to there. You got a zip tie here. I just don't want. That zip tie is going to get in the way. Here, these cables together. Run around the RAM, looking back into the back of the drive cages. Cable management can be one of the hardest things you could ever do to keep your computer stylish and hide all your wiring to make it not look like a rat's nest. Okay. Well, we got our 24-pin connector routed. It's down to the bottom now. Now we need two SATA ports. Well, this is our CPU power, so we'll go ahead and get that plugged in. That goes right here in the top. I can hide the remaining of that cable back in behind the drive cage. Now these connectors, they look like they can plug in multiple different ways, but if you actually look at the plugs, they're different shaped. They're square, they're circle, they're oval. They can only plug in one way. Don't force them. If you're forcing it, it's not the right plug or it's not in the right direction. Okay, CPU power ran and plugged in. We've got our 24-pin connector at the bottom. We need 2 SATAs. That's Molex. We have 1 SATA. And Molex, SATA. So we have 2 SATAs, but 1 on each one. So we'll take the clean one. Since we're going to need a Molex connector anyway, for right here, we'll go ahead and leave a Molex out, and we'll take this down with the 24-pin connector. Right behind the RAM, in behind the drive cage, and all the way down to the bottom. As we go, hiding everything we can behind the back of the drive cages. Not in the drive cages, behind them. We can go ahead and plug this in, but we're not going to do that yet. This does have a SATA port on it, but there's 5 pins that go to the SATA plug. That's a dead one. If you ever try to run Molex to SATA, you've got a dead wire. So I don't trust this to run my drives. It has ran a drive before. It does work, but I like all my cables to have power like they're supposed to. They wouldn't add that 5th cable if it wasn't meant for something. So we got our Molex there. We got this for our SATA. Now we have a SATA to dual SATA connector. We'll go ahead and plug this in. That way we split our 1 into 2 to be able to run our SSD and our hard drive. This, like I said, is irrelevant for now, and I hate that it's ugly, and I'm going to end up cutting that and resoldering it and using some heat tape and shrinking it, shrink wrap. Okay, let's go ahead and get our hard drive mounted here. This is the Seagate 500 gig. We're going to go to the bottom. Very, very bottom. Why? So I can store the SSD directly below it. Lock. And now your drive's secure. So we will plug in our power to the hard disk, and we will plug in the power to our SSD. Alright. Go ahead and plug in the 24-pin connector. Don't ever do that to an actual hard drive. Solid state drives can take some shake and some shock. Regular spinning hard drive, don't let it vibrate, shake, drop it. You will lose data. Not a guarantee you'll lose data, but there's a good chance you're going to lose data. Got our 24-pin connector plugged in there. We'll go ahead and run this down. Plug into this Molex. Again, stashing as much of these cables as we can in behind the drive cage. Probably would have helped if I'd have waited to put my RAM in so I could have some room to shove those cables back, but it'll be alright. We're going to double-sided tape this SSD to the bottom. We're not ready for that yet. I will use this clip to hold these in place. And I need 2 SATA connectors, which I have right here. This is a gigabyte SATA 3 connector, and this is a no-name off-brand SATA 3 connector. What we're going to do is we're going to use the off-brand the same equivalent as a regular SATA, and we will plug this into our SSD. Again, tucking and hiding the cables as we go. Now we have our second one. We're going to SATA 2. SATA 1 being our primary and our boot drive SSD. SATA 2 coming over to our spinning hard disk, which is our game cache, or our game drive. Alright. Hard drive's got power. SSD's got power. Both of them have a data connection. All RAM DIMMs are in place. We got a little extra cable here to do away with. The only thing we're missing, CPU's got power. 24 pin connector's got power. Both hard drives got power. We need our USB 3.1 to be plugged in. So I'll go ahead and clean that out. Now we did have an issue that the port, the guard that hides the pins to be able to slide this in place and lock onto this connector, has came apart from the motherboard. So what we need to do is look to see, if you look in here, which you can't see on the camera, every pin is open. If you look at the motherboard, one pin is missing, and that is right there on the corner. So you take that dead pin, you see where that pin is, so you know the orientation of how this plugs in. And you take this, make sure that it lines up with this connector, and we're going to slide this very gently over those pins and put it back in place. Don't push in the center, don't put force. Slowly back on each edge, back and forth, until it slowly slides down those pins and locks itself in place. You don't want to put too much force on it, you will bend these pins, and once they're bent and broke, not going to get working again. Not unless you're a micro soldering genius. Okay, let's plug this baby in. I forgot about this, otherwise I'd have plugged it in before I did my SATA. There we go. Now we got our front USB put in. We can take this and hide it back here, right in the frame. I will tape that in and magnetize it later. This is just a temporary thing to see if we can get this thing to boot. We'll go ahead and put this last cable, which has 2 Molex, and SATA, and a floppy disk drive power port. But we don't need these, so we're going to go ahead and shove them up here underneath our DVD RW that will never be used. It's not hooked up, and it's only there for looks. It's IDE anyway, and we don't have an IDE connection. Now, this computer is done, except for one thing. The i5 has integrated graphics. I can plug this into a monitor, put a VGA cable or an HDMI display cable onto the motherboard, and boot just fine. But if you're wanting to game, you really don't want to run your integrated graphics on the same processing chip that's processing everything else that's going on in your computer. You really want a dedicated video card. Now, the RX 580, the 1060, the 2060, all those are in use. The only card I've got available at the moment is a GT 1030. This, matter of fact, is the exact graphics card to call this thing a graphics card. This is the graphics card that came in that HP Omen from that Rent-A-Center. High-end gaming gear right here. First thing I did when I heard about this was jerk this out and throw a 1060 in place of it. Yes, it's just the next tier up, but you know what? It's actually got a cooler on it, it's got 2 fans on it, and it runs appropriately. Instead of 2 gigs of RAM, we got 4 gigs of VRAM. We are going to be putting this in place to take a little bit of stress off the i5. In that case, all you will be doing is just guiding your cables out of your way, especially the power cables, which are snagging on me right now. Line your connections up and slowly pop the card into the PCI slot. That's all there is to it. Normally you would have a screw to go in right here as a retainer to hold all these cards and extra slots in place. Some other cases come with tabs like this that you pop up and unlock and then everything comes loose at the same time. I don't like that because if you've got multiple graphics cards or multiple PCI cards in place and then you pop this out and then every one of them is insecure and they can fall out, bend, break the PCI slots, you can cause a lot of damage because of these stupid things right here. So we're going to slip it back in and pop it in place. And that's all there is to it. Guys, we just built this i5 sleeper. Let's see how it boots and how it runs. There's a ongoing PC guideline. You don't put the side panel on until it is fully booted. So we're going to leave it off. But let's see what it can do. I think it's Cinebench R15, Cinebench R20, and maybe a couple games. Let's see what they can do. Let's see what this baby can do. We got power. I think that will look like a pretty good sleeper when she's done. You won't even know that it's not a 2005 computer. And of course, we have an error screen. It's no big deal because it's just a fan failure where I don't have a fan plugged into the 4-pin motherboard header. So we're just going to hit F1 and we should boot straight into Windows. There we go. Sorry for shaking the camera, guys. Trying to get you a little repositioned here so you can get a better image of the screen. Again, sorry. No, we don't want Chrome. We want to... First, I have an overclock applied for our graphics card. Gives me a memory overclock of 131, and I've got a curve already applied. There's a button. See this one right here at the top left? It's OC with a magnifying glass. If you click that, it'll bring up this box, and you can test to see if your overclock is stable, or you can scan and it will look for the best appropriate overclock for the graphics card you are currently using, and will export that as a curve to your core clock. We're just going to hit the check mark to apply, and then we can close this out. As long as you save it under a profile, remember the profile number you want. Every time you boot MSI up, you'll have to open MSI and apply the overclock every time Windows restarts. Let's access my server. And let's run a couple bench tests. Cinebench R15. Let's run that. Bring Task Manager up so I can actually see all 4 cores, what they're doing here. See my 10 gigabytes of RAM there. My SSD is doing nothing. My disk 2, which is the hard drive, is doing nothing. My Ethernet is pulling all this data across the network. And my graphics card is doing nothing. Which is all expected considering we're at idle. So let's run this bench test. I will speed this up in editing because I know these bench tests take a minute. This has already turned into a pretty long video. I apologize, guys. I hope you're getting good information from this, and I hope it helps you a lot in any future build projects you might want to come up with. PC modding is the thing that we're trying to touch on and get into. So anybody with an older machine and they don't have any of the new hardware, they have an idea of how they can break into the scene and get some good quality hardware and make it run the way they expect for whatever use they're doing, whether it be video encoding, gaming, video editing, photo editing, or just text if you work in an office place. Using Excel, Microsoft Word, WPS. We're looking pretty good. I mean, it's nothing compared to my Ryzen 5s or my Ryzen 7s, but we should have a score about 500, and we got 487, which, being a 4-core 3rd gen Core i5, not bad. No, I don't want to save the score. Now, let's go back to that same folder, and let's run R20. No, I don't want to rename it, I want to run it. This is the one that's going to take a minute. There we go. I was wondering if it was even going to load. Now let's hit her. 1040. 1040 on R20. I hit 4160 on a Ryzen 7 8-core 16 thread, so 4000 on 4 cores, or 4000 on 16 cores, divided by 4 cores each, that's about even. 1000 per every 4 cores. Pretty good. Not best in the world, but still, it's alright to be what it is. Launch a little CSGO here. Do this on easy bots offline. We don't want to get online and play for a couple seconds just to mess somebody else's game up. We're just gonna run a couple rounds real quick and see what the game looks like while we're running. Frames look pretty good. And I died. Okay. Let's move on from that. Game was running pretty good. It is an older end game, but it was, well, using about 70% of my CPU. Graphics card was definitely maxed out. So if my graphics card's able to run at maximum, and my CPU is not at maximum, we don't have a bottleneck here, so we've got pretty good frame time consistencies. The game's running pretty smooth. Let's launch a little bit of Rocket League and see how it runs. Just start a season, play next match, jump right into it, see what's going on. Now again, not trying to play to win here, we're just seeing what the frames look like. Frame times are looking pretty consistent. Oh yeah. Asshole. But you know what? We scored. That's all that counts. Oh yeah, we're winning. Oh, too far. Too far. No, no, go back, go back. No! Why would you score on our own goal? Well, just because our computer's running really good doesn't mean that the people on my team are any smarter. Quit pushing me. Get out of my way. Oh yeah, there we go. 3-1. I'm gonna go ahead and quit it right there. Our frames are good. Be nice if we had a bench test. But we don't have a bench test in here, so. Alright guys, well, seen what it can do. You see what you can do with older hardware and what you have readily available at your own house right now and not having to order parts or have them shipped. But if you have a motherboard, look up the socket, look what CPUs it's compatible with. Might get some good performance gains just by buying a higher class CPU that wasn't available in your budget at the time that you bought that computer. Those second-hand parts are fairly cheap right now, especially with the new ones being released. If you're having issues and trying to multitask and getting a lot of lag, you might need a little more RAM. I usually run between 10 and 16 gigs. My editing system I use 32 in. If you're having graphics issues, get yourself a higher end graphics card. Check to see if you have bottlenecks, if your CPU can handle that bigger graphics card. There are things that you can do to improve the performance of your older computers. You don't have to buy these brand new computers. Like I've said before, stay tuned for the Aaron's Rent-A-Center exclusive, where we do an investigation into the PCs that they're trying to sell for multi-$1,000s that you can build yourself for $500. And we also got one where we're putting an HP system. It's a pre-built, and it's an ITX motherboard, but we're building it with a solid state drive